that the people in Gabon, although there are only 1 million, are slowly building that railway. It will be finished about the year 2000.
Thank you, Professor Van Sertima. Like it is, we'll continue with Professor Ben right after this. In the process of the colonization of Africa, there were a number of treaties and agreements and whatnot that were drawn. Maybe we can sort of cover those in an overview.
I think that if we examine the major source of these treaties, we will go to a 3-volume work by the official historian of Queen Victoria by the name of Edward Hertzlet. He wrote a book, a 3-volume work called The Map of Africa by Treaties, under these treaties. It showed there where certain quote-unquote chiefs, because this is a European term, sign away lands by the mark of an X. The documents are written in either English, French, Dutch, depending on who the colonizer was. No indication that the African knew that language. There is nothing in any of these treaties that would indicate that the people of that African land attested to those signing in that the land belonged to the people, and none of the so-called chief could take away the land of the people and sell it or something. We had similar situations here in the United States, of what is now the United States of America, with the indigenous people. Treaties were formed between European and Europeans. The worst of such treaties was the one that gave away the entire portion of what was then called the Congo, later called Congo Free State, to Leopold of Belgium, with the approval of the United States of America, Great Britain, and the other 12 colonial powers of Europe. For example, you had such people as the Gould, the Vanderbilts, and others who were part of the Congo Free State.
Is that the Berlin Conference you're talking about?
The Berlin Conference came out of this. After this behavior, that they were given this, and at the time when the Europeans were grabbing the lands in Africa, starting in 1830, when France invaded Ceuta, the northern part of Africa there, that tip that closest to the Gibraltar, Germany was in a war with France fighting for Alsace-Lorraine. So that when the other colonial powers had taken land, Germany didn't get any yet. So the Germans came and started fighting the other Europeans to get some land of their own, and thus they were obliged to give Germany some territory, such as what is called Togo, which was German territory, Cameroon, and so forth. Germany then went all the way down to what is today called Southwest Africa, Namibia, and around the Horn up to what was then Tanganyika, was part of the German colonial empire. Most of that was taken away with the First World War. As a result of this, this conference was called because the Europeans were fighting among themselves for this rich African land. Kaiser Wilhelm and Otto von Bismarck called the conference in Germany, thus the Berlin Conference that it was called. The United States of America, Great Britain, and 12 European countries participated. The United States was represented at a later conference also called the Brussels Conference. That which was that treaty conference was one in which they now had given Leopold his land at the Berlin Conference. They start to encroach on Leopold because they found that they had given him what was thought to be the richest part of Africa at that time. Leopold then called a conference called the Brussels Conference. The United States was represented by this conference by a man by the name of Henry Terrell. The other one was Casson. Both of them carrying the title Minister Plenipotentiary and Ambassador Extraordinary. So that the United States were participating in the cutting up of Africa, in the colonization of Africa, yet in politics, in political science. We are told in the classroom America had nothing to do. Of course, America controlled Liberia up to this date, in spite of the latest revolution. That was the treaties made by the United States and France and England with respect to the American Colonization Society, which came out of the aegis of the Congress and the Senate of the United States, the role of Ulysses S. Grant in the Baliwa decision there. Even the United States President Grant took part in such negotiation and such treaty negotiations.
So the determination of who got what share of Africa was made by non-Africans. There were no Africans at either the Berlin or the Brussels conferences.
Not a single one. And at the time, you had independent African nations. You had Ethiopia, which became independent older than any other nation that you got in the world today. At that period of time, you still had you had Haiti, which had become independent in the 1800s. You had Liberia became independent in 1857.
So are you suggesting that all of these treaties, though, that beforehand and afterward, that was struck between Europeans and Africans, the Africans didn't really understand what they were signing away? And those who signed weren't even authorized to do it.
Those who signed had no authority, and many of them did not sign anything. They had people on paper who did not exist. And they drew boundary lines according to the river, the flow of the river, according to the lake, and then they made such things. They even had tigers in Africa shown on the map, and tiger is not an indigenous animal to the African continent.
Were the definitions of the countries of Africa as we know them now drawn out of these conferences?
Every one of the countries that you have in Africa now, without exception, the jigsaw puzzle for lines, boundaries, were established at the Berlin Conference and the Brussels Conference with only minor changes as wars went out of the Berlin Conference and the Brussels Conference. Then came the First World War, and out of that, the documents of that was adopted by the League of Nations. The League of Nations made their own conditions with the treaties they made between Italy. Even before that, when the Italians had invaded Ethiopia for the first time and defeated in the Battle of Adawa by Menelik II, although he had won, the European powers came together, made treaties to stop Menelik, because Menelik had said he was going to wipe the Europeans from Africa. Then there was that other set of treaties. There were more treaties, again, adjusting the boundaries in the Berlin, as that conference at the League of Nations, which had taken away that land. Adjustments were made. The next body of international body.
But let me just interrupt for a minute. In other words, our concept as Africans of Africa didn't have those boundaries.
No, sir.
We didn't have a Mali or a Nigeria or something like that.
The boundary very dependent on where the people fed their animals. In other words, the boundary of Mali was where the Malian was with his cattle. And that could have shifted with the season, just so the neighbor next door to him. Africans did not have, if you cross this, I'm going to shoot you, or this cross here, I'm going to strangle you. The Malian would meet, for example, his neighbor and says, oh, how is the grass up there? He said, well, it's a little better. Up there, you know, yours better. He says, well, okay, I'll move up there today. Well, let us all go up, and the two other families would talk, and they'll go up. And that's where the boundary of that next nation would be.
This land is mine kind of concept
This is European. European established the land boundaries situation.
Fences and things of that
so
nature
that
were alien?
started among the Europeans. Land boundaries shifted among African people. You didn't have this say, well, if you cross, you're going to shoot you. And all this kind of thing. It was it's just like surnames.
It's that same process it brings to mind of what the European brought to this land, the United States, treaties with the Native American.
That meant nothing. All these so-called treaties, did the indigenous people read the language? Do they know what they were signing when they did sign that X, if they in fact signed the X? How many of them knew in Louisiana that in French? How many spoke French? And the men knew what was written down there. If I tell you something that you're signing, but you can't read the language, what I told you could be quite different than what you signed,
there.
that little X. And what identification there is about an X that you could identify tomorrow that's your X and not my X, even if I signed it. And this is not something that we're saying that happened in the past. It is happening today. Right now, there are indigenous people here being moved up. In Africa, they're indigenous. In Australia, you said